of adding in cumulative exam at the end of the year seems a lot if we're going to be doing all that park testing, plus students do the SAT, the SAT subject test. You also have APs going on. You have SATs themselves and the ACTs. So it seems like the end of the year is already kind of a laden time. So we're going to be adding all these hours of park testing. So I know this is just ideas and nothing is final, but it does raise a little bit of concern.
Yeah, and it's like you're listening to our conversations we have when we're in meetings together, and that's part of the idea. I think we're trying to, when we've gone through this, is how do we roll it out? What's this going to look like going forward? And part of the idea that Mr. Markarian had was, well, we need to, who are the experts that are dealing with assessments and instruction? That's the supervisors. Can they look at each course and determine that? If you have a course that's taking a park assessment, does that Algebra 2 course need an end of the year summative assessment? They already have a summative assessment, so do they need another high-stakes assessment? Probably the answer that Ms. Wolf would say would be no. They have theirs. If you're in a course where there is no high-stakes assessment, you might say, well, in this particular course, there are a lot of skills we build on. We want to see how successful, if they've retained those skills at the end of the year, this course might be a very good place to put one. So you're right. In a course like an AP course, or perhaps honors courses where a high number of students take the subject SAT tests that are subjects that have park testing involved in them, the plan is to be flexible. And I think you said it right by saying, light on our feet. How can we make it, flexible for us so we can do what's best for the students? And that's kind of the plan right now. So the details aren't there yet of what that end of year looks like, because we really need to go literally course by course to determine what that looks like.
I don't have a question as much as a comment. I just want to thank all of you for the presentation, and it just gave me such an appreciation of an insight into what all of you do every day, trying to figure out this park maze and determine what's best for our students while implementing what's forced on us by the state, what we do have control over, and to be able to do the best we can on our assessments for our students. And you guys do this every day. We just kind of hear about some things that we hear about our committee meetings, we hear some of the public presentations, but really a presentation like this with all of you here, it really comes, a realization of what you're working on every day. And I just want to say, I appreciate that, and this has really been very insightful for me. And there's a lot of work and a lot of challenges. And I just want to thank you for the presentation and for all the work you're doing trying to figure this out and implement, because it's just so many layers to try to implement what we can do the best way for our students. So thank you.
Thank you.
So, I think you have been very restrained in one way as well. So I think Park is strategically absolutely brilliant. No one will argue that. Given the government's experience in rolling out web-based national initiatives, you have really been very good about not expressing your probably very, very strong reservations about how successful they're going to be this time with something rolled out nationally, and hopefully it's not the same software company that's working on the back end. But I guess the most, but it is here, and complaining is not going to help. Implementation and making the best of it as you're doing is what we need to do. So no more complaining. But we do have to be really careful that there is enough time between a green light. I mean, you have a green light, but you don't have, I guess, the final green light, because the final green light is when you actually see it, and the fact that you haven't even seen anything other than a couple of sample questions for the pilot that's coming, what, in a couple of weeks? I mean, that ought to say something. Again, I'm complaining. I'm not supposed to be complaining. But will there be enough time between that final green light and the time that you need to purchase the equipment and have it here and working? In other words, the last thing you probably want is to spend whatever it is, a third of the budget on something, and then have everything be delayed by a couple of years, which I suppose is something we shouldn't talk about, but it is probably in a contingency plan somewhere.
Hi. I have very little to add other than what was already said, but I did just want to make a comment, sort of question, clarification maybe. In terms of the common assessment that you are planning to do next year, this is going to alleviate some of the stress from the students and the teachers with their concerns of delivering new material while they were testing older things, yes?
Yes. Yeah, yeah, right. The idea was, we felt after analyzing this and looking back, with 2 years of quarterlies almost under our belts, was, what happened? What's the kind of the report, the after-action report of quarterlies for 2 years? And we think the result was that the model was teachers were teaching the curriculum, they were working through what they had done in the past and inserted a quarterly. And so they took some material and they put a quarterly. So what we did really essentially was add 4 assessments. That was not really the goal. So we took away 2 assessments and added 4 back in, when really the intention was that it would be a more natural fit into the curriculum. So as we look back at what was our vision from the beginning, and this is our opportunity to hit the reset button and say, get back to what was our vision, what was the idea of what a common assessment was going to do for us as a district. And I think what we presented tonight was an idea of what that's going to look like when we're done.
I have my list. Some of it was already addressed. And first of all, we all asked for a presentation to explain what's going on with the quarterlies and give a recommendation. And in that respect, I really do appreciate it, because that's something I think every parent, every student is highly attentive and attuned to, because it affects their everyday life. So I appreciate it. And I think you also are aware of that. And so given that, I think stress is a big deal, and not dumbing down the curriculum is a big deal. And how do you do both? So first of all, returning exams. That was not addressed. And what I've noticed is all the previous common assessments, be it midterms, finals, quarterlies, the teachers and the administrators don't return the exams. So now, if we're going to common assessments throughout the entire year, are you not going to return the exams, or are you going to return the exams? It's a pretty black and white question, and to leave it up to the teachers to do whatever they feel like, it just opens up for a lot of problems. I think we need to be clear, concise, and let everybody know what is the game that we have to deal with. So that's first question. And I don't know who wants to answer that. But
What's the second question?
and I know you and I have had a constant
Yeah, this is for old
discussion
time's sake,
about-
Preeti, right? Right, now that
but that was
I'm
up in
handing
public.
curriculum off to Dr. Heineman, we used to have discussions about this in Board of Ed curriculum, and I know it's come up in district curriculum too. So I think the simple answer to that, and your question about whether or not the teachers will hand back summative assessments, the short answer is the purpose, of course, of handing back assessments is so students are learning from their assessments, learning what mistakes they made. Teachers can review the material, then go over the material that perhaps a whole group got wrong, or a supervisor can look at the data, and then the teachers can go over that information with the students. So for that purpose, I'm sure the exams would be handed back. Can I right here stand up and say that all common assessments would be handed back in 14-15? No. I think that's a decision that's going to have to be made after we look at the types of assessments that are given. Certainly, the results will be reviewed. Students will be given back the assessments. Yes. Will they be given them back, and will they be collected? I don't know. It would depend on the nature of the assessment. I can tell you that all the results would be given back and reviewed. I know in the past we didn't give the midterms and the final exams back to keep. I also know that in some instances we didn't give them back at all. I would have a concern with that. Otherwise, what is the goal of administering the assessment if the students can't learn from their mistakes? So in that argument, we're on the same page, that the exam should be given back to review. And I can't tell you that the exams will be collected again. I'm trying to be as diplomatic as I can with this answer, because it does have some history behind it. But again, I think our goal here is to say that these are regular tests. I think that the only reason we wouldn't be handing them back is if, as a team of teachers, they designed an assessment that they felt like they wanted to administer over a couple of years because they did want to get a baseline of data and then start to look at cohort performance. So if you're handing the exams back, you and I both know that exam gets out there, it's out in the general world, and it can't say that it's not going to be shared and the results won't be skewed. That said, the vast majority of our assessments are handed back, and the students are able to review them, keep them, and put them on their refrigerators, or do whatever you might do with those exams. But I do think there's some merit in us keeping the exams. I think that's lost to some folks as to why we would do that. Again, you do want overall to be able to look at results long term and say, we've got a problem because we have 3 years worth of data. And when that exam gets out there, it does force you to keep refining, and ultimately, there's only so many ways you can ask about, sorry, Kristen, I'm going to pick on social studies here, but there's only so many ways you can ask about a particular tariff if you're looking at econ. And so, at the end of the day, I think now, I'll say one more thing, because this is something that has come up over the years. There are many ways to ask questions, and when you're asking an open-ended question, I think that does afford you the ability to hand back exams always. Because when you have open-ended answers, which takes place in a lot of our courses, you can rest assured that it's very hard for a student not to understand the material and be able to give you a cohesive answer. They can't just regurgitate it back. So I think that speaks to our items and the types of items we choose for assessments. So I think it's bigger than just handing back exams. I'm sure this is something that the director of curriculum is going to look at. Because it is an important issue. I hope to still chime in from time to time on this, because it is important, Preeti. I mean, I make light of it, but it is an important issue.
Well, one thing I would like to see is the decision not be made solely by the teachers and the directors of each curriculum. Each curriculum director is involved in the decision-making process, and it's not just the teacher just saying, I don't feel like making this exam over and over again, so therefore we're not going to give it back. I just want it to have a reason to do it.
Yeah, and I think the key, and I won't be long-winded here, I think the key is that it should be a partnership with the teacher and the supervisor,
Right.
and I can tell you that discussion is going to happen pretty soon, as early as this week. I know that Dr. Heineman is going to share this presentation with the staff this week, and there'll be discussions at department meetings this week.
Okay. More questions.
On what topic?
I don't know, I kind of have skewed writing here. The end of your exam. So what wasn't written in the charts is what you said, which caught my attention, is that, if I can paraphrase, is based on any grade level in high school, if they have 5 classes or 6 classes, somebody will decide, a curriculum director will decide, curriculum supervisor will decide which ones will have an end of year exam or which ones won't. I think telling a student third marking period would not be nice. I think something like that would be decided before school starts. So maybe over the summer, and then they know what they're in for. And is there any scenario which any student would have to take an exam in all subjects? That's what I really would like to avoid, and I think you too. And then could we have it in writing so the parents know what's coming down?
Right. So and again, this was kind of a fairly new vision that we're trying to put together. But the idea was that we want to balance the issue of stress and still being responsible about giving the students the experiences that we think they should leave Ridge High School with. And in order to do that, one of the things we talked about was trying to look at the level of a student coming from Annan as an 8th grader, say, to a freshman compared to a more seasoned high school student in a junior. And what's a reasonable expectation? And maybe one of the ways you can look at that is to kind of scale the level of stress and end-of-year assessments in proportion to their experience as a high school student. So can you guarantee exactly what that's going to look like yet? I'm not sure yet, but what I asked Dr. Heineman to think about with the supervisors was taking a chart, essentially, if you will, of typical sequences for freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors, meeting with the supervisors, having the supervisors have conversations with the teachers, and handle it on a course-by-course basis. Not even math, science, or language arts, but specific courses within content areas where it makes the most sense, and where students come the end of the year would still have a manageable expectation of the kind of stress that they'd have to experience when they went through those courses. And certainly, I agree, it does make sense to give the students that information at the beginning of a course rather than late in the course. What Sean and I talked about was the program of studies, and at some point, once that list is developed, edit the program of studies to indicate which courses have end-of-year assessments, so that people have an expectation as they're doing their schedules and building what their experience is going to be for the following year.
But they're doing it now for next year, so.
Right, so in September, certainly teachers can talk to the students about it.
Then they can change if they don't want to be in a
No, they're not
class.
going to change courses over that. No.
That program of studies idea is a more long-term.
Okay. All right. Then the idea of common assessments, I don't know, maybe I'm being sarcastic, but I kind of thought everybody should be doing it anyway. Kind of surprised they're not. Anyone who was doing it, kudos to them. And whoever isn't and has to be told to do it, well, it's good that they're doing it. And now here's the problem. It's just like students, when they're forced to work in groups that they weren't already happy to be working with, and they weren't doing it already, they may not want to be working with these people. And now they're going to be forming an assessment that's going to be affecting these students. And what consequences are there for the teachers if they can't get it together? I mean, I'm really worried because now students are getting the grades, but there has to be consequences all the way around.
I'm a lot less worried. I see our teachers as very professional with the guidance of a supervisor in choosing which units or when and where they're going to give a common assessment and coming to agreement on what the content of that common assessment is going to be. I'm not concerned about that. I think we have outstanding professionals that are going to manage that issue well, especially if we're not saying to the teachers at every point all the way along the year, you're going to give every single question on every assessment that you give to be the exact same as the person down the hall teaching the same course. That said, I think it's really important that we think about assessments as driving instruction. Assessments drive instruction. If you want to know what the expectation level is of teachers that are teaching a particular course, look at the tests they're giving, and it's going to tell you the whole story. If you want to take a look at these test items and say, is that a hard test? What's the expectation of knowledge that students are going to have and skill and experience in order to do well on that particular test item? Well, if it's a simple fact recall question, the answer is not a lot. But if you look at some of these test items in the PARCC exam, they're very challenging. They're not easy. They're not simple. And they require a lot more, such as the word explain. Okay, it's not just going to be choose from A to D. A lot of the multiple choice items might be choosing from A to H. And there are follow-up questions that might require a written response and an explanation about how do you come to that conclusion. So I think it's important to remember that when you look at an assessment, you have a really great expectation of how high a bar is that teacher setting for the students. And if we look at the test items in these sample questions and we see a pretty high bar, I don't feel bad about that test because it means we're setting a high expectation about what we're expecting the kids to know and be able to do. So I think that using some common assessment helps you do that. It helps you challenge everybody to keep the bar high. But we also have a world of professionals who like to be individuals too and don't want to be, clones of each other necessarily in everything that they do. So you pick and choose, and I trust that Brian will be able to work with the supervisors and come up with a schedule of assessments that makes sense, and that they'll have some flexibility to work with the teachers to choose which courses and where and what the common assessments are. And I don't have any concern that they'll have a problem doing that. Might there be challenges to get 100% consensus? There's always challenges to get 100% consensus, but I think we'll be able to manage that.
Okay. And what was it? Oh, the bell schedule. The seniors, I'm sorry, the fourth marking period. You said there's going to be a new bell schedule. So before, when we had finals, there was a week that almost the teachers used to not have instruction. They were just reviewing. Is that the same plan again for the end of year summative exam?
Well, we haven't made a schedule exactly like that yet, so we're not sure. But I can tell you this. Basically, at the end of the school year, at the high school, you need a couple of half days anyway in order to be able to free up the seniors to do their graduation practice and take care of what you need to have them ready to walk. So because of that, you have the opportunity to build a schedule on those 2 half days where you could make some extended periods. Now, those 2 days are not going to be enough. You might need a couple other days where you might be able to create a schedule at the end of the year where you're meeting with each class for an extended period of time. Regardless of whether or not you're giving that end of year assessment that's worth a double test based on the selections that they work out, you still have a lengthier period that day when you meet with your period 2 class. Maybe you're just giving your last test of the year and it's just a regular test, or maybe it's one of the courses where there's a more significant end of year assessment that's weighted differently. But my thought on that was to ask Frank to start to think about that, what it would look like even for this year to try at the end of the year, creating those longer blocks of time so that you see each class for an extended period of time at the end of the year, even though this year we're not giving those end of the year assessments, just giving regular quarterlies that have traditionally been about an hour long. So if he builds periods that are 80 minutes long just to try a schedule out, that's one of the things that I want to discuss with him just to see if that would work. Right.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'm just going to stand up because this is probably the worst Board of Education meeting I've ever been to, and I'll comment accordingly. First, I want to congratulate you guys. Wonderful job. I didn't understand any of it, but I did. But I wouldn't want to be trying to implement what you just presented. It would be like doing Obamacare. But I didn't have any places to write, so I'm going to have to jump around a little bit. But I do want to congratulate you. I don't know how you're going to do the job. Let me begin with, if we want to increase the education and the knowledge of the kids, you don't test them more and more, you teach them more and more. Nobody talked about teaching. And what you have to do is forget the tests. I know how the kids are doing. I can rank them. And nationally, you know, the national scores stink. There's a lot of terrible schools out there. So to compare us nationally is ridiculous. And there's a lot of poor schools even in the state of New Jersey. You don't have to be a genius to know what the trouble is. And it has nothing to do with testing and assessment. We all know it, but you can't talk about it, can you? So let me just, these are, I didn't have any place to write, so I have to jump around a little bit. But I don't want to miss the point. I congratulate you all. I don't know how you're going to do the job. I'm very, very concerned about what this is going to do. Just like I'm concerned about Obamacare. You can't let a bunch of intellectuals who don't know anything about what they're doing institute national programs, and that's what we have here. It's never been tested. We don't know. How do you improve the economy and what have you here? Well, somehow we have to get the cheap jobs, the people working, you know, that get the jobs. We have to, but can you run it from America, all the cheap jobs? Probably not. It's a much more complicated problem than just plain education. And we're not even comparing apples and apples because we don't measure everybody in every country. It's a whole different population and a whole different base. As I said, this was tough. I don't think I want to see what happens here. If it's a testing and we just go through the motions and pretend to do it, but don't lose what we're doing, that's fine. But if we're serious about doing all this stuff, they've never even tested this. They don't even know what the details are, not a clue. I didn't understand any of this. What a PLC is. What the heck is that? Even a common assessment. That's something different than we do now. Well, what is it then? I know what a 90 is. I know what an A is. But what's a common assessment? I don't have a clue. Maybe homeschooling, folks, for you people that have kids, because I don't know whether you could tolerate what they're liable to do here. But I think the other side of it is they're going to minimize the impact of this by not going crazy. At least I think. But how do you say that when the governor and everybody else is behind it? I have notes all over the place, so I'm almost going to quit. But I'm very concerned about the district, and this has nothing to do with education. It has everything to do with trying to place the blame in politics, and it's a national program. And if already our test scores have begun to stabilize, and if we get into all of this new stuff, you're going to see them go down. And we don't want to be the same as this Nowheresville, USA. We want to be a top school. And I'm concerned this is wrong way. So I need about a month to figure out all my notes, and then I want to make a statement next meeting.
I actually didn't have any questions because everyone else asked them, and I wasn't going to say anything, but now I will after Mike talked. I guess my take on this is a huge challenge, as everyone already explained, as how they're going to implement these PARCC tests. I think people are tending to confuse the Common Core and the purpose of the Common Core curriculum with the actual testing. So the Common Core is more rigorous. I mean, our district was very rigorous already, so it's not a drastic change like for some districts where they weren't teaching what they needed to teach. But it's more rigorous. I mean, I've seen the changes in particular subjects in our town, and I think they're all good. I mean, it's not drastic from what we were doing before, but I think they're good additions. The PARCC testing is a separate issue, and how it's been implemented, I have big issues with, and how we're expected to pay for it. So I think there's two whole separate issues here, and I don't want to have everyone be confusing them in their mind, because I don't think we're dumbing down the curriculum at all. I think we have issues with how we're going to implement these tests, and it's going to be a challenge, certainly, both financially and logistically. But anyway, so I think we go back up here now, right, to continue our meeting? Okay. Okay, we are now up to item 9, which is the superintendent's report. Can I have a motion for item number 1? Elaine? A second? Karen? Okay, if there's no comment or questions?
I have a comment. I still don't see any improvement. We're reporting it. Is it doing any good? I have my doubts. So.
Okay, any other comments before we do roll call? Okay, Nick, could we please have a roll call?
Sure, Mr. Byrne?
Yes.
Ms. Swerner?
Yes.
Dr. Beer?
Yes.
Mrs. Cassell?
Yes.
Mrs. McGowan?
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Woolrich?
Yes.
Mrs. McEwen?
Yes. Okay, at this point, we're up to public comment on agenda items. Because it's pretty late and we already had a long presentation, I'd ask that you keep your comments to the 5-minute limit tonight, please. If you have a comment or question, come up to the mic, and there's a clipboard there. By the podium, there's a microphone that you can use.
Yeah. All right, I left it there. I left that microphone right there. Brian. Hey, Brian. Brian, I think there's a microphone right,
There should be
right
a-
there.
a-
Let's
a
just use
wireless
that one,
one.
please, so people don't have to go to the aisle because we can't see them. You can just, ma'am, if
if
you
you
wouldn't
wanted to
mind,
come
just
over
right in
here,
front of
in
the
the
podium,
middle.
please, just so we can see you. Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Lutza Yoblag, and I'm currently a sophomore at Ridge High School. Today, I hope to bring up insightful points regarding the current state of education reform in New Jersey, focusing on the Achieve NJ program. Plans for Achieve NJ were initially drawn up under the Race to the Top initiative, which offers individual states federal grants for establishing data-driven education reforms. For its proposal of Achieve NJ, the state of New Jersey received $39 million from Race to the Top, which authorities at the University of Virginia call a quote-unquote bribery scheme, and which education historian Diane Ravitch criticizes for dismantling the teaching profession. Implemented this school year, Achieve NJ seeks to evaluate teachers based on their students' performance, employing a combination of student growth objectives, student growth percentiles, and in-class observations. According to the State of New Jersey Department of Education, student growth objectives, or SGOs, are long-term academic goals that teachers set for their students in the first few weeks of the school year. These goals are based on state standards and information about student learning. In addition, the system relies on national, state, or district assessments to gauge students' progress. This data is in turn used to evaluate teachers. While I fully comprehend the necessity of setting goals, the data-driven nature of SGOs corrupts their initial purpose. The district-wide tests assessing students' progress are written and graded by the very same teachers who are being assessed. While I do not doubt the ethics of any of my teachers for a minute, I cannot help but envision the moral dilemma that being graded based on one's own grading must create. Moreover, not only do SGOs burden teachers, they also produce hardships for students. SGOs encourage, even require, teaching to the test, robbing students of much-needed opportunities for creativity and critical thinking. As Brown points out in his article, How Students Learn, the temptation with learning objectives is strong to list objectives or outcomes that are easy to measure. Therefore, teachers are much more likely to set forth goals which require little critical thinking or creativity, because after all, how does one measure imagination? Curriculums are being dictated not by what is beneficial to students, but by what is easy to measure. SGOs teach students what to think instead of how to think, encouraging rote memorization instead of rationalization, and emphasizing students' ability to recite facts instead of their problem-solving skills. Student growth percentiles, or SGPs, are based on an individual student's performance on the New Jersey Assessment of Skills and Knowledge, or NJASK, over several years. As Mr. Hall mentioned before, beginning in 2015, the PARC assessment will phase out the NJASK, meaning that SGPs will affect even more teachers in the state. A student's score with SGPs is compared to the scores of similarly performing students in the state to measure progress. These measurements are then employed to evaluate teachers. However, according to authorities at Rutgers University, Montclair State University, and the Pennsylvania State University, researchers have until recently chosen not to evaluate SGP's validity for estimating teacher effectiveness, because SGPs are not designed to infer teacher effectiveness. These unnecessary stress producers provide no valid information about teacher effectiveness, yet this system is forced on educators across the state. Furthermore, SGPs require teachers to stick to a narrow state-mandated curriculum, which limits originality, inventiveness, and imagination, merely for the sake of bureaucratic convenience. After all, data-driven systems work fine with factories and assembly lines, so why can't they work with education? Because education differs from every other bureaucratic institution, because learning simply cannot be quantified. The emphasis Achieve NJ places on standardized testing proves that we value lifeless numbers far more than creativity, that our students are worth more as statistics than as individuals. Evaluating teachers based on their students' test scores embodies, at best, a misguided attempt at education reform, and also represents a blatant mistrust of teachers. It pains me to see that educators who foster my love of learning and who inspire me every day, having their abilities scrutinized by an inadequate system which grossly exaggerates the power of big data in education. I understand that Basking Ridge is just one small community and a huge system dominated by data. However, I implore you all to seriously consider the impact of Achieve NJ on our education system. As a society, we need to decide whether gathering meaningless data supersedes education's goals of inspiring students and widening horizons. For me, at least, the decision is clear. We need to reform education, not to mechanize it. Thank you.
Wow, I feel really underprepared. That was amazing. I just have 5 kind of distinct comments or points. In one of the presentations, there was a slide comparing college prep
You have to hold
midterms.
the microphone.
Oh, closer. Midterms and finals to a slide that, and it did not include honors or APs. And then that was midterms and finals, B minus, C plus. And that was compared to a slide that did include for quarterlies honors and AP. And I'm wondering if we could have a slide that is consistent, just so we can actually compare. And another slide that I think would be really, really helpful is if you said a student, before he took the midterm, had a B minus going into the class and then ended up getting a C plus, or maybe he had a B. Whatever it was, show us what he had prior to the exam in both the midterm and the quarterly situation so we could actually see. I mean, you must have that data. I think it'd be really interesting. This is I feel very unorganized, honestly. The cutoff, as they came up with the HESPA and what the cutoff was for passing, for Ridge, obviously it was very, I mean, for the majority of students, it's a very easy exam, I think. So do we believe that Park is going to come out to be anything like HESPA, or is it going to be something that is so far above, and then the failing districts will have not a shot in the world? So I'm wondering, since I'm not even sure actually if it's all across New Jersey or all the people who are taking Park all have the same. So that's another question. The cost issue for all this equipment, you know, if we suggest that there's still certain, like Abbott districts of the old days, those districts obviously get a lot of state aid. So they're not going to have trouble buying this equipment. But what about the ones in the middle who don't fall into that category and actually have to use the tax money they get from their town? Are they going to be able to afford to buy these items? And if they can't, how is the state going to force us to do it? So I feel a little concerned that because we won't hire teachers and we won't do the turf field and we won't do this and we won't do that, yeah, then we're going to have the money. But then what about these other districts? Are they just going to get away with not doing it because they just don't have the money? So I'm afraid that we tend to always do things first. So I'm worried that maybe we're jumping the gun. I totally understand the common assessment idea. It sounds good, although my several concerns are that if you have 2 or 3 teachers teaching the same material, and one teacher says, well, I'm going to teach to that exam, and another teacher says, well, I want to challenge my students, I'm not necessarily going to teach to that. Or what if one class or one teacher's classes come out all missing a certain section? Are you then going to say, oh, well, obviously that teacher didn't cover that section, so we're going to make an accommodation to account for that? So I'm hoping that will come into it. And then the final component, I don't know exactly what you mean, and I'm not sure if we're hedging because we don't know yet, but is there any suggestion that this is going to be from September to June? Or are we saying, since all along we've been saying the quarterlies align closely with college, are we saying it's going to be a quarter's worth of material as the final? So I really hope there's some clarification with that. And that being said, I hope that, I'll say because of the extensive troubles we had with quarterlies, I hope that you're going to have a parent panel that you're going to meet with and talk about all these ideas. And I also hope that, there's some teachers here that I feel have some amazing ideas. I'm confident they have amazing ideas. And I hope that, on top of having the administrators, I feel like having a panel of teachers who say, in practice, this is just not going to work, or let's do it this way, or just have a whole group of people weighing in, as opposed to it being kind of coming from the top down and then foreseeing the problems on the backs of these kids who've already suffered enough over these, year and 3 quarters. This is only because I was kind of researching the park administration, and I understand, we're guessing maybe it's going to start counting towards graduation in 5 years, but in the midst of me reading, actually, I think something that one of the board members sent to me, there was something that suggested that while they're figuring out what they're doing and while they're working on coming up with a cutoff, that they intend to post the scores on the transcript. And I don't know if that would be mandated by the governor, but I would hope that if there's any suggestion of that, while they're working out their kinks, that we would never put anything on a transcript that would hurt the kids. So I think we have to be proactive and make sure that we're watching out for something like that. And then the very last thought is, if this is what you're meaning by a final, like a fourth marking period quarterly idea, I would urge you to do it first marking period or second marking period, partly because when we initially came up with this idea, it was for the teachers to see how they're doing, for them to compare themselves to each other, to figure out where the kids are, to see if everybody's on the same page, to see if one teacher's really got, the whole idea that's the same as the other teacher, as opposed to kind of doing it at the end when it's not going to help the kids, it's not going to help the teachers. And also, I feel like we have SAT 2s, we have AP exams, we have, I don't know, whatever other exams. I'm sorry.
I'm just going to tell you you're at 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Is this on? Since I sat through the presentation and I garnered a lot, I think this is the reason why you should resist Common Core. There's a couple of points I think you might want to take into consideration. If you're going to have a peak in data usage, broadband usage, you're going to go right down the street here to Verizon and ask them how they took care of the Super Bowl. They had extra bandwidth for a short period of time with leased equipment. So, I mean, because they said they're going to have $1 billion in the Super Bowl, they had all the cell phones there and they brought in extra circuits just for that time period. Instead of investing $1 million in broadband that we're going to use 3 months out of the year and then not use for the rest of the year. The other thing I think we ought to go to the state and say, I want you to pay for every computer for every kid in the state with the same amount of money. I don't care if they're in Newark or in Burnett Township. And I'm going to ask our legislators to put a bill in to make sure if this nonsense goes through, that we don't have to take our hard-earned tax money and buy the computers for all the rest of the districts. I think you know that this town sends over $100 million down to Trenton. You know what we get back. This time, state mandate, state pay. Thank you.
Karen Gray, 15 Independence Drive. Just a couple of quick things. I know you won't answer questions. I just want to put them out there. Where to start? One thing I'm a little concerned about when I heard some of the conversation among the panel about how and what will be determined to be a final exam or whatever that end of year assessment is that it be by subject. not by level, because I think you might find students making selections, course selections, with the knowledge that one level or another level may or may not have that end-of-year assessment. I just want to echo what Preeti said about returning the tests. I am in full favor of that. I know many of you know that. I also want to ask a question, or put a thought out there. This idea that we're going to have no standard for graduation for an undetermined number of years seems a little unnerving to me. I know that it's not a huge concern in Berners Township because the standard that we use today is one that we're fairly successful year over year at. But if the standard is really changing and we're not exactly sure how that's going to pan out, it seems, at the very least, it seems like bad policy to have no standard. So, and I don't mean that directed at this group, but just at a state level, it just seems like a crazy idea. And then I just want to say, what will be done? I know it's not a big deal because there's not a lot of these instances, but at the high school, we have some courses that are only taught by one teacher and one teacher alone. So we do lose some of the validity of the common assessment when it's an individual teacher. And it's just something I'm putting out there. I don't have huge concerns about it. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Good evening. My main concern is about student stress, and there's a whole bunch of topics tonight that touched on that topic. So I think there was a comment made.
Excuse me, could you tell us your name and address?
Oh, sure. Bruce Warner, 24 Independence Drive. There was a comment made earlier that you don't learn more by testing more. I couldn't agree more with that comment. And if you look at, in total, the amount of testing going on in all forms throughout our school district, and you look over the last 10 years, I think you'll see that the balance has shifted to more and more testing and less learning and instruction. And I'm very concerned about that direction and the impact it's had on student stress. The experience with quarterlies, my observation is that in my high school students' classes, she's had tests and assignments all the way up to the day or day prior to quarterlies, and then quarterlies are dropped on top of them. And that creates this supercharged stress environment. So what I've seen out of it is, limited value in terms of grading and assessing performance, and purely accelerating stress. So I wholeheartedly support the direction you're looking at in moving to eliminating quarterlies. I do have concerns about how a summary or final exam would be implemented. And if you look in particular about all the type of testing that goes on in the spring in particular, with SAT tests, ACT tests, subject tests, AP exams, there's a tremendous amount of testing going on already. So I would certainly suggest that you consider giving credit to students that take a AP exam or a subject exam as counting as their summary test. That's exactly what those are. So give strong consideration to that. The other stress-related topic that I have is the plan to make up our unfortunate 3 snow days currently that we have to make up, hopefully no more. I think the issue there is we have 3 contiguous days. There's going to be.
Excuse me, can you bring that back up on non-agenda items? Because right now we're just doing agenda items.
Just agenda.
Yeah,
I'll
okay,
be
thank
back.
you.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Deborah Boslin, 35 Van Cortlandt Way. Thank you for preparing the presentation tonight. Thank you, Mr. Byrne, for all the comments that you made. I really appreciated the points you pointed out. I am very scared and concerned about the students, especially in the short term, with all the unknowns around the park testing. There are districts all around this state fighting the Common Core and Park, and states all around this country questioning it. I just ask you all to please remember that and consider it whenever you're meeting with legislation. The costs seem outrageous. Hold on, I have lots of notes too. And the entire end of the year seems like it's going to be used for testing. Additionally, getting to the point about the exams not being handed back, I know my kids use them as study aids. So if we're going to be having a cumulative final, it would be extremely helpful for the kids to have them. Thank you.
Hello. I was here 2 weeks ago, talked about stress, daughter sleeping on the couch all
Sorry,
night.
can you give us your name and address?
Jeff Boslin, 35 Van Cortlandt Way. I came here tonight. Listen, I really appreciate your presentations. It's great for us to get educated on what's going on and the challenges you face. The most interesting thing about it, though, was the whole recap at the end was all about the challenges you face. And all I kept thinking was, where's the discussion around the challenges of the kids? And the questions I have are we now going to test them for a week and then jam more quizzes and the materials that we like to test for in the week before and the week after? Are we going to be testing these kids for 3 straight weeks? 1 week standardized, the other 2 weeks? Because this is what happened with quarterlies, right? We didn't stop doing our quizzes and our projects and our tests and all our homework piles. We just put more testing on. This seems additive again. So that's something definitely to think about. And then also the comments on state funding. If the state wants us to do this, they should give us the money and they should give it to us equally. If not, I don't really see what the kids are learning from this. This is just, how are they doing in Newark for how are they doing versus Basking Ridge? How are they doing in Montclair versus how are they doing in Montgomery or Cumberland or take your pick. At the end of the day, it's all benchmarking. The kids aren't necessarily learning from these tests. They're just being tested again. So I talked about stress 2 weeks ago. It feels like we're not really thinking about stress here. We're just thinking about more testing. And that was my point. My point wasn't just quarterlies. My point was the amount of testing we're doing versus the amount of, I think as the student talked about earlier today, it was great to hear from her, she was extremely passionate, was about how they feel and the environment in which they learn. You need to think about the environment in which they learn. And then I have to, because this isn't interactive, 2 weeks ago, Preeti, you made comments back at my comments. You put it on the parents. What are our kids spending their time doing? Why are they sleeping on couches? Why are they studying so much? And you specifically mentioned athletics. And you mentioned that your children don't do athletics, so they have time to study. That's great. But if you look at obesity rates in this country, we want student athletes. We want students who are exercising. We want students with good eating and exercise habits. We don't want them just reading books and practice and literally studying for tests morning, day, and night. And this standardized testing is not going to help them in any of that direction. Again, we're going to get data, and I agree with that. But we really should be thinking about long and hard. If we're going to do it, how are we going to adjust the curriculum as a result? And unfortunately, taking away teaching time is not the best answer. Thank you.
Hi, Amy Haskell, 93 Bernard Drive. I apologize for having my phone. I forgot my notes from an email I sent earlier this week to Mr. Howlett and a copy to Mr. Syatt. And I just was speaking about the stress levels at the high school, and it was a particularly bad week of testing and quizzes for my particular daughter and how she dreads going to school, which I hate to really use that dramatic word, but that's where we were at this week. And so I decided to write a letter about not just my child, because it's really about a bigger issue of these kids and their motivation, and they're actually demotivating some of these kids who are driven and motivated, and when they feel like their head is up against the wall, what do we do now? And so with all this testing and assessments and the stress levels that are going on, I'm very concerned that we're losing kids that we never would have thought we would have lost. Like I said, I'm speaking for all the kids. I'm not just speaking about my particular case. I did go on to say that I'm uncertain how to proceed, which it appears that all of us are. I very much appreciate the presentation today because I see what a giant hurdle this is and this testing business. I had no idea what is going on behind the scenes with the park testing. So for me to sit up here and talk about quarterlies, I'll take them back in a heartbeat right now because this is going to be outrageous. I'm lucky. My daughter's going to be a senior next year, and she's my last one out the door. I'm not going to have to deal with this. I really implore parents of younger children to get involved and to be part of this process because, like I said, I don't have a dog in this fight, but I still feel strongly because I've been very active in the school district for many, many years, and I really think it's important for this to be a collaborative effort to get these kids through the system. I did suggest in my email that, too often parents complain to each other and they never really make the administration aware of these serious issues. I think we're beyond that now. I think everybody is aware of how serious this is. So what my suggestion was that we somehow come together with teachers and parents and administration to try and at least keep the information going. We may not always like what you have to say. We may not always agree, but we must have an avenue to hear what's going on. We hear teachers talking to students in class and not knowing what's going on themselves or giving information that they shouldn't be giving because they don't know. I think during these next couple of years, with all of this testing information going on and all the upheaval, that we somehow are able to even include a student or two and just try and keep the information going. When I first became involved in the district, and I know I have to wrap it up, we had something called an inter-school council. We also use the PAC meetings. It's so that information can flow freely, not so you get hordes of emails from individual people. But the PAC was designed so that parent representatives could represent the views of a lot of people. So in the event that you say, well, there's only a few people and PAC has one or two people complaining, it's not. The PAC people are there complaining on behalf of their whole constituency from that school. Inter-school council work the same way. I think it's time we create some collaborative communication process, even just to get the information out to the parents and the students and the teachers so we all know we're on the same page and we know that you have these kids' backs and we know that you care. And I think it's important for you to get that message out to the public. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joni Rasavi, 21 Paisley Lane. And one thing that's already been said is one thing that I have definitely seen in the quarterlies is different teachers have different things that they teach. And I do think that, I don't know what the answer is. I don't want them to all become robots. They each have their own style, their own way of reaching the kids, their own things that come up that they talk about. If they're in GovEcon and it's an election year and they're going to talk about what's going on with the election, some of them may go off on different tangents. That doesn't mean it's wrong, it just means it's different. And the kids are still learning, but that doesn't mean they're all learning the exact same things. And I really don't understand the benefit to them having the exact same test. There's no way that the teachers can 100% comply, and then it just doesn't make it fair to the kids who aren't in that teacher's class, if teacher A is making the test for quarter one, and I know we got rid of quarterlies, thank you. But if teacher one is giving a test, but teacher two didn't teach it, I don't understand how that's assessing the kids. So that's a big issue for me. The other question I have that we were discussing is, what happens if you say to the state, no, we don't have the money, we're not paying for that right now? What are they going to say? I don't know that answer, but what will they say? As somebody else mentioned, we know what's going to happen with the districts in Newark and Trenton. We're buying their laptops too, so I just don't understand that. And as far as park goes, like somebody else just said, my last one is going to be a senior next year, so I will not have to deal with it. But I do have a concern on how park tryouts are going to be administered this year. They just took HESPAs, and I know that those aren't a big stressor, but they're taking ACTs, they're taking SATs, they're studying for APs, they're stressed out about college, and we've had snow days coming out of our ears, now we're going to take some of those juniors out of class to practice park tests, and I'm concerned about that personally, and that is, I guess, for me, just a junior issue. I don't know why we're doing that, and I sure don't want my daughter to be one of the people that's going to be pulled out of class to take yet another test. So she's not going to be learning, but she's going to be a guinea pig for something that's never going to affect her, and I don't understand why we're doing that. And then, is this going to be another one of those things where I don't know why our school, it's great in a way, but I don't know why our school always has to be 3 years ahead of everybody else. I'm afraid we're going to buy these laptops, or whatever it is, tablets or whatever, and 4 years from now, like the biology tests, like all the other tests that have come and gone, we're going to find out park didn't work, we're not doing it, it's never going to count for anything, and oh, isn't it great that you just bought all this stuff? So those are my concerns, my thoughts. Thank you.
Is there anyone else out there for public comment on agenda items? Okay, at this time, I'd like to close public comment on agenda items. We are now up to committee reports. Finance. Can I have a motion to approve items 1 through 3 under finance? Elaine? A second. Linda? Any comments or discussion?
I have.
Mike?
I didn't have the minutes to the last meeting, at the last board meeting, and they were probably the best finance meeting minutes that I've ever seen. So
Thank you very much.
if everybody would write minutes like that, couldn't resist.
I appreciate it.
Any other comments? Okay, can we have a roll call?
Mr. Byrne?
Yes.
Ms. Swerner?
Yes.
Dr. Vierick?
Yes.
Mrs. Cassell?
Yes.
Mrs. McGowan?
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Woolridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McEwen?
Yes. Okay, we're up to personnel. Could I have a motion to move items 1 under personnel? Bev?
I move item number 1.
A second? Elaine? Thank you. Any comments? Questions? Okay, could we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Mr. Byrne?
Yes.
Ms. Swerner?
Yes.
Dr. Vierick?
Yes.
Mrs. Cassell?
Yes.
Mrs. McGowan?
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Woolridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McEwen?
Yes. We're up to curriculum. Linda, do you have anything?
The curriculum committee is meeting this coming Friday, March 14th.
Thank you. Policy? Susan?
Thank you. Policy did not meet this month in March. We didn't have anything for the agenda, but I did want to do a quick report on the February 10th meeting, because I think I missed the first meeting of last month. The one big item we spent a lot of time on were the evaluation policies and regulations that were required by Achieve New Jersey, which were actually on the agenda at our February 24th meeting for second reading. So I won't get into detail about that. But one policy that we did discuss was a proposed policy called Transportation by Private Vehicle. And the committee reviewed this policy. It's not a required policy, but it could be adopted by the board if it wishes to authorize that pupils could be transported in a private vehicle by a parent to a school-sponsored activity. The policy could be of assistance for board-approved field trips and other trips where maybe only a small number of students were attending, and it might not make sense to try to hire a bus for such a trip. There is also a suggestion that we could modify the policy to include a parent-signed permission slip that would allow the transport of their student by another parent in a private vehicle. After discussing and reviewing this policy, the consensus of the committee was to not recommend this back to the board for adoption. Our primary concerns with the policy was that, first of all, there was a concern of the emergent nature of these trips that would not allow time for the board to obtain fingerprinting and a background check of the parent driver. And that was a particular concern because there is a good bit of lead time in that we would be basically putting this out as the transportation option without being able to obtain that sort of background check. And there was a concern that the policy would encourage an increased reliance on private transportation in lieu of obtaining a bus. There was a further concern of placing parents who would not wish for their students to be transported in a private vehicle by a parent in an awkward situation, and that they would then have to drive if this was the only transportation available. And the committee also felt that there was a significant distinction between parents organizing carpools for transportation on their own, as is frequently done with the William